Welcome to Hired Up, the podcast for next-level executives and board nominees. We strive for that win-win for all, from navigating the hidden job market to finding confidence to go for what you want at any age, or simply to go out and get yourself hired up. And we especially love helping successful executives make exciting career moves that let them be leading heroes at home, not just at the office. So if any of these challenges are ahead for you, visit us at westgatecareercoaching.com.
My name is Maureen Farmer, and I am the CEO and founder of Westgate Executive Branding and Career Consulting. And I have the pleasure today to have a conversation with Chaz Thorne. First of all, I just want to say how really honored I am that you've agreed to come in and have the conversation with me. Actually, you haven't come in. It's still during COVID, and we're doing this over the phone, or through Zoom. But look, I'm just really excited for you to be here today. And so Chaz is a master strategist, best-selling author, and award-winning filmmaker. He's helmed multi-million-dollar companies in entertainment, tech, and agri-tech. He's also co-founder of the Give Agency, a pop-up event that has raised over $1.5 million for Canadian nonprofits. That's awesome. As both an artist and a business leader, he has a unique ability to combine creativity with tangible outcomes. Chaz has an MBA of both the Kellogg School of Management and School of Business. Chaz is a certified professional facilitator through the International Association of Facilitators, a certified coach through Ericsson International and the International Coach Federation, and certified sales professional with the Canadian Professional Sales Association. And one thing that's not in your bio, Chaz, is that you are a graduate of the program in Montreal, the National
Theater School of
Theater
Canada.
School, yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's a pretty big deal as well. I see it's not on your bio, but that's where you you weren't there. You had been long since been there when we started working
Yes.
together, but a very, nevertheless, a coveted school.
Yeah, I find that when you start to do corporate work, a background like mine, as varied as it is, can sometimes be seen as an asset, and sometimes it can just be confusing to people. So I'm oftentimes I'm very aware of depending on who the audience is, rather sort of what I highlight of my background, because it's both lengthy and varied.
Mm-hmm. And very accomplished too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So our call today is going to be focused around reinventing your career or career change. And Chaz, when you and I first met a number of years ago, you were embarking on a new chapter in your career after a very lengthy and accomplished filmmaking producer and director of critically acclaimed films. And it was, I remember it was just such a pleasure to work with you. And I'd love to catch up with you and find out what you've been doing since. So
Sure.
Within that context, just tell me a little bit about your career so far since then, I guess.
Well, yeah. So obviously my career began as an artist, and I trained as a classical actor, and that's what I did for a living. I was an actor, and I had also studied as a classical singer. So I did musical theater and film and television. That moved into writing and producing theater, which were sort of my first entrepreneurial ventures, where I learned how to run a business. And then that moved into making very large films, theatrical films that were released in movie theaters. And that was the foundation of my background in business. And then around the time that you and I met, I was an agri-tech entrepreneur at that time, and we were at a point where we were sort of rapidly scaling and expecting that we would be raising investment soon. And I felt that it was important to get a formal education in business and do so quite quickly. So an executive MBA became the right choice for me at that time. And so that's what I did. And then after that, I've owned a few other businesses. But for the most part, my role, regardless of, I own three different companies, and but the common thread between all of them is essentially I'm a strategic advisor. And my belief is what I've found in working with business leaders over the last 7 or 8 years is I really wanted to be able to show up for my clients in the way that they needed me to, not in necessarily the way that I was trained or the way that I was most comfortable. So what I've focused on in all of that time, obviously in my bio, you heard all of the letters that
Yes, you
that
have a
go
lot of
after
letters
my
after your
name.
name.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
it's a bit of alphabet soup after there, but that is because I genuinely believe in being able to show up as I'm needed, and therefore what I've done is I've invested significant time and effort in terms of having uh, an education and certifications around all of these different things that my clients need from me, whether it's executive coaching or um, work in competitive strategy, which is what I really, really love, or facilitation. Strategic planning is something I hyper specialize in.
Hmm.
And that's really been the path for me ever since I started my formal business education around 10 years ago. And I continue to do that. And also the other reason why I continue to do it is I genuinely love the work.
Hmm.
And I would say that as an advisor to others, you don't want to be the hammer that looks at every problem as a nail. And
Mm.
I've certainly seen that in my colleagues where the solution that they present, or the way that they choose to show up is based on what works for them and not necessarily the client. So that's what I've been up to for the last while.
So I'd love to ask just a couple of questions around the executive coaching that you mentioned. Can you give us a sense of what specific types of things you coach your executive clients on, how you help them?
In terms of executive coaching, it's funny how often the same challenges come up. And they normally have to do with soft skills in managing people, leading people more accurately. People don't like to be managed.
Yeah.
um, and time prioritization. And then just given the type of person I am and how I work, because I believe that a leader is a whole person.
Hmm.
You don't leave who you are at the door when you arrive at work. And I would argue that if you do, you are likely not showing up as an embodied leader, and therefore you're not as effective for either yourself or your organization as you could be. So it ends up moving into a lot of talking about life,
Hmm.
talking about the seeing my executive clients as a whole person.
Hmm.
And very tangibly, I am a very process oriented individual.
Hmm.
And I developed a strategic planning methodology that I use called the Lighthouse Method, which I use in large organizations in terms of strategic planning. And I also use it as a tool when I'm working with executive clients so that they can develop a strategic plan for their lives. And some of the terminology is slightly different, but for the most part, it's the same methodology. And at its core, it's about developing alignment
Hmm.
throughout your entire life, just like a good strategic plan develops alignment throughout an entire organization.
Fantastic. I absolutely love that. And um, I've had the experience myself too, where individuals will say, that's my professional life, and I try not to let it spill into my personal life. And I don't think that that's possible. As I agree with you, I think we're holistic people, we're a whole person. And I think that the more that we have to adapt our behavior in an environment, the less aligned we are.
For sure. Well, and we're seeing this rising demand, and rightly so, for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be authentic when you're having to, in actuality, compensate
Mm-hmm.
for who you really are when you're at work. It doesn't work unless you have multiple personalities. You're the same. You are the same person.
Mm.
And even more so, I would argue that if you allow yourself to be the same person, you will be much more effective as a leader as well, because that mask that oftentimes goes on when you step through the doors of the office. Um, I guess the main question I would ask of those that really believe it's necessary is, well, tell me how putting on that mask actually serves you,
Mm-hmm.
and then tell me how it actually serves the people you serve, whether it be your clients, your customers, or the people that work with or for you, depending on where you are in that organization. And I'm very much so, I'm not not really, it may sound a little bit this way, but I'm not much of a touchy-feely person when it comes to executive coaching, interestingly.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in results.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in measurables. I'm very strict about all of those things. But you can still have those. The reason why I believe so much in showing up as your full self is because I've seen time and time again that doing so increases the value that you're able to actually bring to your company as well.
You talk about measurables. How do you measure, step changes in that type of behavior? What type of metrics do you use to do that?
People really struggle with those aspects of things. I am a believer in SMART goals. So that's absolutely, the idea of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Um, Depending on who you talk to, there's slightly different
Mm-hmm.
variations of what those different letters stand for. Uh, but if you spend the time to think of it, you can develop those for what you may consider softer or more emotional um, goals as well. And it is work,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and increasingly we operate in an increasingly competitive world. It's and everything is increasingly measurable. You certainly see that on the digital side. So you need to figure out for yourself how you will measure your success. And sometimes it's things like, uh, someone may recognize for themselves that, for example, they're working too much and it's leading to burnout, and that becomes part of their personal strategic plan. They need to address that. And so you
Mm-hmm.
go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, what can some of the measurables be, or what can some of the targets around what you will actually do be? And that can be as simple as, well, I will make sure that I take one full vacation for a full week once per quarter,
Mm-hmm.
for example. So it doesn't always have to be revenue based
Mm-hmm.
based goals. There's these days pretty much everything in our lives are measurable, is measurable. So you've got Fitbits, you've got
Mm-hmm.
calendars for this and that, and timers, and all of this stuff. So there's always a way, if you use your imagination, no matter what it is, to somehow tie it to a metric that's indicative of progress in that particular area.
When you talk about the coaching piece again, can you give us a sense of what a presenting problem might be? You mentioned one, burnout, but are there other presenting problems that executives come to you for that might be a proxy for something else, or the proxy might be the burnout or the issue, but they come to you with a presenting problem that's not directly tied?
Yeah, well, I think the classic one, and any executive coaching colleagues listening to this will probably chuckle because they'll recognize it, is a very common one you'll hear is, I just can't get people to do X.
Right.
And so the most common thing you see, and it's not, this isn't a criticism, it's just common. It's something you need to learn, and depending on what your background is as a leader, depending on if you're old school or new school, or how you were educated, how long ago you were educated, it can be this idea of in a way passing the buck of responsibility onto others.
Mm.
And inevitably through a process, you end up coming back to, all right, well, you're the leader here. So how can you ensure that you've actually done everything you can to address this issue amongst your team? So I would say that the the higher level of that is coaching towards taking more personal responsibility. And I don't mean that in sort of a lectury way, because when you move towards personal responsibility, you also move towards personal empowerment.
Mm.
So what you're saying is when you work with a client towards taking more responsibility for the challenges within their organization or on their team, you're also showing them, no, you're not helpless here. When you take responsibility for it, it also means you can do something about it. And there's pretty much no problem you could be facing that someone else hasn't faced previously, if you add a little bit of imagination and benchmarking to the equation, and you don't get stuck in, it has to be the exact same challenge
Or scenario, exactly. And
exactly.
I think when you take personal responsibility for these issues, I guess we'll call them, you also model good behavior for your team too, I would think.
For sure. It's funny. I suppose this is slightly off topic, but one of my favorite professors in business school was this guy named Keith Merningen at Kellogg. And unfortunately, he actually passed away not long after I graduated.
Oh.
He wrote this great book on leadership called Do Nothing. And his more or less his belief around leadership is, if you're doing it right, you shouldn't be doing anything. Now that's a bit flip. Obviously,
Right.
there's lots that you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but it really comes down to this idea of coach, don't play.
Mm.
Um,
Right, right,
so
right, right.
if you're in a
Mm.
leadership position, that should be what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, you hear it time and time and time and time again from individuals, that may sit at a different place on the org chart, either towards the bottom or in the middle. One of the largest complaints you hear frequently is micromanagement.
Yes, yes.
And that is people that are playing instead of coaching. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not their fault. It has a lot to do with how people are promoted and how people's careers are built. Because, the classic example is the salesperson. So, your EVP of sales moves on, and conventional wisdom, and I say that with a grain of salt, conventional wisdom says, all right, well, you promote your top salesperson to be the new EVP of sales. And that will tank you and your sales team every single time,
Mm-hmm.
because the the skills that are required to be really good at a functional thing are not the same skills that are required to lead. And this is very frequently broken in terms of how people are moved up within organizations. So that individual, when under stress especially, is going to revert back to what it is that made them successful and got them to this point of leadership, which is the functional skills. And that will cause them to micromanage their team.
And also adaptive behavior too, when they are pressured into, if they're under pressure for within a new position or new metrics or a new leadership team, that's when the adaptive behavior can pop in there as well.
Yes.
So if the leader is not aligned, values-based and even skills-based and, with the team, then that's ripe for adaptive behavior, which causes all kinds of trouble for everyone.
Yep.
And
the very real cost to the organization is that then you end up losing your top salesperson.
Yes.
And you will likely lose several other of your top salespeople because they'll hate being micromanaged by your former top. It's very classic. It's so classic that it boggles the mind that it still happens nonstop.
I know. I don't understand it. I myself work with a lot of leaders around the world, and I see it in them. That's why they're with me, because they're being micromanaged and they're top performers. But when they leave the organization, they won't disclose that to anyone. They want to save their own reputations and don't want to be pointing fingers, and
Right.
it's a phenomenon I see a lot. And I'm seeing a lot of this in smaller organizations, where sometimes the CEO or the leader, whoever the title is, has to get his hands or her hands dirty. They have to be in there. They have to be a player as well as a leader, because that's how they're funded. They need to get things done. They need to get things done quickly. So I would imagine how these individual leaders are coached would be different depending on the type of organization that they come from.
I think so. Admittedly, a lot of my work has been with very large, formal structures. If you are in a scrappy startup, yes, you will absolutely lead slightly differently. You need to have a much more fluid organizational structure and model. Things can change so rapidly. So yes, I mean, you may lead in a slightly different way, but the main thing that I see time and time again is just having no plan.
Right.
And that's where you also get the disconnect, and where a lot of dysfunctional behaviors can come up, because no one knows why they're doing what they're doing. And again, it comes back to this idea of alignment. And so in my work doing strategic planning, it's always a conversation about alignment, because if you do it right, everyone in the organization should know exactly what they're responsible for, and exactly what that task, it goes all the way down to the task level, what that phone call means, what that email means, and how it connects to the larger thing that organization is trying to accomplish. And a lot of the bad rep that strategic planning gets, or planning in general gets, is because so many of the models for doing it haven't evolved since the 1950s. And that's just not how we work anymore. And you can do a plan in a day. It doesn't need to be, you don't need to spend $500,000 and hire a fleet of consultants to tell you about.
That's the way it worked way back when I was in corporate, Chaz.
Absolutely.
It was the most, it was the most daunting and intimidating process for everyone.
Yeah.
I remember those days very well.
And nothing gets, and what's the main thing about that is nothing gets done. You annoy your people by essentially having some outsider come along and insert themselves as an expert. Unless you've got really, really bad people, which is typically not the case, by the
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm.
You are the expert in your business, and you are the expert in your industry. A strategic planning process done right, the person you're working with is an expert in strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it actually takes away from the process if they happen to have deep expertise in your particular industry.
I agree 100%. I was listening to a podcast last week about a digital scribe who went in to these large organizations and went through a process flow, uh, uncovering issues and problems that the leader and the entire organization was facing, and they used this process to do problem solving. But they were the experts in the process flow and uncovering the problems, but they weren't an expert in the subject area.
Right.
And that came out very, very clear. It was quite a fascinating podcast to listen to. They were consultants that were working with some of the big accounting firms, or sorry, they worked with the accounting firms serving their clients, some very, very large, up to 700 people at one time. I could not imagine facilitating a group that big. And I know that's what you do, right?
Yeah. Well, it's really what that comes down to is you, and this is part of the discipline of being a facilitator. And when you are trained in a bunch of different methodologies and you wear a bunch of different hats, you also have to be very clear with yourself and with your client which hat you're wearing at what time. One of the classic things about if you're doing facilitation properly, you hold the container of the process. You don't weigh in on the content.
Mm-hmm.
That's not your job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, it's interesting where we're starting to see in more progressive organizations discussion of facilitative leadership, or
Mm-hmm.
discussion of also again engaging process experts, not content experts. That's
Mm-hmm.
not to Sometimes you need a content expert if you are if you're consistently having issues with getting shipments on time from China. All right, hire a logistics expert that has expertise with China. But that's not the kind of stuff I personally don't get into the weeds on stuff like that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at higher level organizational function
And change. It sounds like
and
you're
change.
and
Yes.
change. So I'm curious, you mentioned something earlier on in the conversation about soft skills. At least I think you did, or
I
did I
did.
dream that? Okay. Can you give us an example of what you see as being an important soft skill to have? Because soft skills mean different things to different people.
The way that I think of them is soft skills is all the people stuff.
Okay. Sure.
It's not the building of the widget. It's not the analyzing of the numbers. It's not that aspect of whatever it is you're doing. It's the stuff that requires you to be extremely present and flexible and open in the moment. And it's the people stuff that some people really, for good reason, some people really, really struggle with.
Mm-hmm. And just indulge me a little bit more here. I'd love to find out from you what would you say are the top, one or two soft skills that people struggle with, or are they different for every person, or do you see a theme at all?
I think they're very different. If you even just think about soft skills in general, they are very much so an expression of who we authentically are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, what we're good at, what we're not good at, will be different with different individuals. The main the main soft skill that trumps all others, and God, I even hate using that word, but the main soft skill that is more important than all the others, we'll say that, is listening.
Right.
And honestly, everything else is subservient to that. And it's not only listening to others, it's listening to yourself. How did I show up in that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
How am I feeling right now, and how is that going to affect what I say to this client in my next phone call?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All of that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is the supreme, the ultimate skill. You tie that into self-awareness. And by the way, this circles back to the first thing we were talking about. You can't listen well if you've got a mask on,
Right.
or you're playing a character.
Right, because you're trying to catch up. You're trying to predict what you should say
Mm-hmm.
versus how you really feel, and by then you've lost the message or you've lost the intention.
Yeah, and it acts as this filter that by the time whatever is coming out of your mouth reaches the other person, or by the time whatever is coming out of that other person's mouth reaches you, it's been distorted.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's been through that game of telephone.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to throw out a caveat here. It's not lost on me that in certain professions or in certain high pressure situations, you will show up in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
and you will lead in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I it is correct sometimes to lead as an authoritarian in a
Mm-hmm.
crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually what your team wants from you and what is appropriate.
It's context. It's context.
Absolutely context.
Yeah.
And if you want some rules around that, the best framework I've ever seen for that is the Cynefin framework.
Oh, do tell and do spell.
So Cynefin, it's actually a Welsh word, and it's spelled Cynefin,
Okay.
but it's pronounced Cynefin.
Okay.
In Welsh, and it came through a Welsh management consultant. His last name is Snowden. As far as I know, no relation
to the other
US,
Snowden.
The other Snowden, famous Ed. What I like about it, you could go, like all frameworks, you can geek out on them and make them overly complicated. But really, what that does when applied properly, it allows you to see what context you are presently operating in. So if you are operating in a chaos context, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it is absolutely not only appropriate but required that you lead in a very strong-handed way.
Mm-hmm.
And I can feel certain people cringing when when that's said. But again, as I said, I'm all about what's going to get results, not about sticking to one way of thinking or
one process for the sake of the process, whatever.
Right. But then your job as a leader is
Mm-hmm.
to recognize when the context has shifted.
Right.
And that's where people get caught. So
right.
A really great example, so it's not abstract, is 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And Rudy Giuliani showed up very well in that crisis context. And he was very authoritarian. And that was what was required. And
Mm-hmm.
he was significantly lauded for
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then when he was no longer leading within a chaos context, he continued to lead that way. And he lost that. That's why he lost.
Yeah.
because that was no longer appropriate. So he was leading in a context that, frankly, as we've certainly learned about Giuliani since,
Mm-hmm.
That's his default mode.
Right. Command and control.
Exactly. He wants to lead that way. So when the context shifted,
mm-hmm.
he didn't shift with the context.
Right. Right. So fascinating. I have a couple of more questions.
Sure.
I'm conscious of the time. I could talk forever on these topics, but Thinking about your career so far, given your rich and varied and very accomplished background, what would you say has surprised you the most? And just have fun with the answer. There's no right or wrong answer here.
What surprised me the most was falling in love with competitive strategy.
Oh, nice.
If you consider the fact that I trained as a classical actor
Yeah,
and then made movies for a living and obviously was a creative professional, I wouldn't have thought that.
right.
And I happened to have an incredible professor for competitive strategy. Her name's Sonia Marciano, and uh, she taught us in our program, and she's full-time faculty, I believe, at NYU Stern, the business school there.
Wow.
And she, one amazing professor, but whatever it was about that subject and the way she taught it, it really made me fall in love with it. And what
Mhm.
I saw was that it was a different way to express creativity and, dare I say, even artistry, just a different canvas.
Mhm.
And that was probably the largest surprise yet in my career, that I fell in love with this thing that
Mhm.
I never would have expected.
So tell me a little bit about competitive strategy. I have a very, I think, superficial sense of what it is, but what does it do for people and how do you play in that pool?
Well, I could give you this long answer, which is what most people do, or I could just tell you it's very simply what is required to win. However you define winning, which is where it gets really interesting, because it's not depending on the organization, depending on the individual. And by the way, it applies whether or not it's a person, it's a business, it's a nonprofit. The principles all hold.
Mhm.
So it's first about what would you consider a win, and then what do you believe is the path to get there, and then how will you know you got there, going back to the idea of metrics again,
Yeah.
and then potentially even having the conversation of what happens then. What do we do once we win,
Mhm.
um, which you may not know until you win, but sometimes that's a conversation that needs to be had as well.
That's fascinating. So do you have a framework for that or somewhere where I can learn more and maybe people listening will want to learn more? I'd love to learn more.
I don't. Um,
We have to hire
I,
you. We have to hire you to find out.
yeah, there you go. I try not to be too much of a zealot about frameworks. I've seen time and time again, this goes back to what I said about you should be flexible. You should know as many of the frameworks as possible, and not be the hammer that sees every challenge as a nail. And I believe the same thing uh, when it comes to competitive strategy. There are many, many, many really great books about it from people that have been extremely successful in this world. So what I try and do is just keep on top of uh, some of the older references around competitive strategy, and some of the sort of classic thought leaders, and then as well as is always just keeping an eye out for the new ones that people talk about. And
Mhm.
then within that, what you're doing is you treat every organization and every client with a bit of originality,
Mhm.
instead of just, all right, we're just going to
Yeah, like the hammer, like you
apply
talk
this.
about the
Yeah,
hammer. Yeah, no,
exactly.
absolutely. That's really fascinating. Well, I guess the next question I have on my little list here is what might you do differently, if anything?
I'm working on delegating more.
Okay.
Speaking of the sort of things, I find for those of us that play in this space of, well, play in any space actually, whether it be competitive strategy or executive coaching or strategic planning, all of the things. The old saying about the cobbler's son has no shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly have coached others towards getting better at offloading functional tasks and so on when they're in leadership, and that's something I'm really working on is uh, letting go of things a little bit more to allow me to build more resilience and scalability
Mm-hmm.
into my businesses.
Mm-hmm. I think we all struggle with that.
For sure.
I
It's
think
one of the
everyone
reasons
does.
why, and it's one of the reasons why executive coaches will end up talking about it so much.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Delegation, I'd have to say, is probably one of the top leadership skills that I talk to my clients about, because without that, they can't build capacity on their teams or their
Exactly.
organization. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure. And I was going to ask you a question about the pandemic and how it's changed
Mm.
business.
Oh,
If you want to answer that, if not, it feels almost like overdone now. I think that we've been talking about this for months now, but if there's something that you wanted to mention in terms of the global pandemic and how it maybe has changed the way you've done business, if you wanted to do that.
well, there have been some very tangible ways that it's affected how I've done business. Uh, it in one of my businesses, it caused us to do a complete 180, and
Mm,
that's been amazing. uh, the the pandemic actually forced us to build a better business
mm-hmm.
and let go of a legacy piece that we should have let go of, but just
Right.
happened to be something that we were really good at and enjoyed doing, but wasn't really right
Mm-hmm.
moving forward.
Mm,
But it certainly one thing that happens when you're in the world of strategy is people come to you oftentimes looking for certainty,
mm-hmm.
and of course there is no certainty. um, but I think that
Mm-hmm.
for a very long time I've been someone that has lived in this illusion of certainty.
Mm,
So the pandemic, what it has given me, beyond like all of the tangible stuff, honestly it's boring, whatever.
mm-hmm.
that
Yes, yes,
doesn't
yes.
make for
Agreed.
that doesn't make for good conversation. What makes for good conversation is how has it affected you as an individual. And what it's taught me is to get much better at embracing uncertainty
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and finding some comfort in that,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone just wants everything to get back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
It won't. There
Mm-hmm.
will be no normal. There's no normal to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
um, and a lot of people hate that. Certainly a lot of my strategic clients are like, oh, what should I do, and so on. I was like, hoard cash. Other than that, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But
Plant a garden. Live
yeah, and
sustainably.
I guess again, it comes back to this idea of understanding what context you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are certain things you can do, and even from a strategic standpoint, there are certain things you can do. I've also seen clients that have stuck their head in the sand and doubled down on the same old, and
Mm.
they will disappear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you embrace uncertainty but continue to act? That's the key. It's not embracing uncertainty and then flipping out and stopping and becoming completely reactive. No. How do you embrace uncertainty yet still do stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Still remain proactive. Still try and make things happen, even though you're leading within, again, the Kinevin framework, within largely a chaos context.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've really needed
Mm-hmm.
to embrace and find some comfort in.
I love that answer. Thank you.
You're
That was
welcome.
that was brilliant. Not what I was expecting, but I have to say I embrace it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to hit you with all the boring, dry stuff.
Well, Chaz, look, it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. I know you're a very busy person. I do have one last question, and that is, what are your future business plans?
My future business plans are, I don't know.
Hmm.
Interestingly, my business partner and I are going to be going into a new planning exercise over the next couple of weeks, and we had a, obviously you need to you need to do what you tell your clients to do. We were
Absolutely.
operating a strategic plan that we had come up with back in December, and then COVID happened, and we actually got extremely busy as a result of COVID. Um, so it actually increased the volume of our business. So we've just been uh, very much so reacting to that,
Hmm.
and trying to stay ahead of that. But we're just about to go into another planning exercise, and go, okay, well, given everything that's happened, given the state of uncertainty of the world, now what does our plan look like moving forward? And I'm really excited for that,
Hmm.
because and I don't want to, obviously I don't want to minimize how terrible COVID is, or how it's been had a devastating effect on so many individuals, so many companies, so many industries.
Hmm.
And I really don't want to minimize that.
No.
Um, but certainly I'm very interested in going, okay, well, given this state of the world, um, given the uncertainty that we're all grappling with, and we certainly haven't reached the bottom of how bad this is going to get, not even close. What does that mean?
Hmm.
What does our plan look like now? So basically, I can't. My next plan for our business is coming up with a plan.
Hmm. Well, thank you for your candor on that, because there's a lot of sort of pomposity going on right now in the business market where people don't want to admit that they don't know what's next.
Yeah, yeah, that's well, and obviously look at one need only look at Bay Street and Wall Street for um, definitely some great examples of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, so look, I wish you all the best for your business planning, and a final piece of advice for anyone listening who may be considering a complete career change, or maybe an industry change. What's one or two things that you could um, say to them based on your own experience?
Um, Take a look at the Japanese concept of ikigai. So that's spelled Ikigai, and it's a Venn diagram of four different things. It's what you love to do, what you're good at doing, what you will be paid for, and what the world needs.
Mm.
And it's a different way. We have a tendency to get immediately get tactical
Mhm.
around thinking about career change or life change. And this is a step before you get tactical,
Mhm.
because if you can, in the center of that Venn diagram, in the center of that overlap of those four different things, there should be a few things in there,
Mhm.
and start from there, and work from that place, instead of just going instead of just going tactically
Mhm.
to, oh, I need to make this much money, or
Mhm.
oh, it needs to be in this industry, or
Mhm.
oh, it needs to focus on this skill, or whatever.
Mhm.
Start from that place. That would be the best advice I could give someone who's contemplating something new, which obviously a lot of people are, as a result of what's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is good to go down to those foundational levels because otherwise we are, doomed to repeat the same mistakes we've made in the past if we have, and maybe where there are successes that we've that we're repeating, but we do have a tendency to repeat our behavior. So taking a really good look at what we want to do through this type of a lens makes a lot of sense to me.
For sure.
Well, look, Chaz, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Maureen.
Thanks for listening to Hired Up with Maureen Farmer. If you enjoyed the show today, please tell a friend and write a review for us. For customized resources to help you get hired up to your next C-level position, visit westgatecareercoaching.com. Do you struggle to find words for emails, phone calls, and job applications for your C-level job search? Get our CEO Script Vault, job search scripts for busy executives to help you get hired up. Kindle edition available on Amazon.com. We'd love to welcome you into the Westgate family of success stories.